Welcome to episode 1 of season 5 of the Filmmaker Film Watcher podcast. I'm filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio.
And 5 seasons in, I am still Film Watcher Greg Ralph.
Our first episode of season 5.
I know, it's
I'm stunned.
wordless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's to be here after so many seasons and to be doing another season with you is just fantastic.
And you know, we often joke amongst ourselves that we look back at the first episode and to go back and listen to that, or even think when we first turned up and said, "Okay, let's do it." What are we doing?
What are we talking about?
We better watch a film.
Yeah, I remember that very well.
Memories.
I know. But it's great to be back. It's fantastic to be able to share another season with all of our listeners.
And in this first episode, we've cunningly chosen films under the theme of the firsts. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so these are films which pretty much made their mark in terms of just being the first to do something.
With particular technology.
So we're first looking at The Jazz Singer, the 1927 version of The Jazz Singer.
Which was the first talkie.
Then
we're doing 1973's Westworld, the sci-fi, I guess, thriller you'd call it, which was the first to use CGI in a 2D form.
And then we're looking at the 2001 film Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, which was the first entire film to use motion capture technology. So that's why it's the firsts.
And we thought, first episode, not the first season, but that's okay.
And then we're okay.
And so, Ricardo, why don't you get us started on the first film of the firsts?
Okay, The Jazz Singer. I was excited to see this classic 1927 film, as I'd seen many images surrounding it for as long as I can remember, but had never actually seen it. Released in 1927, The Jazz Singer is an American musical film directed by Alan Crosland that was the first feature-length movie with synchronized dialogue. It began the uptake of talkies and marked the end of the silent film era. Now, having never seen it, I found it so interesting that this essentially was a silent film which held out the talkie element for the times the jazz singer actually sang. Now, even though there were films before The Jazz Singer that used synchronized sound for sound effects, this was the first that used it with dialogue. It really is the bridge between silent film and talkies. The Jazz Singer follows the story of Jackie Rabinowitz, a young man who defies the traditions of his devout Jewish family. When found singing at a popular local establishment, he is punished by his very strict father, Warner Oland, a Hazan, which is a Jewish musician trained in vocal arts who helps lead a congregation in songful cantor. Jackie's father demands he take over from him as the next Hazan, just like him and generations before. This prompts Jackie to run away from home. His supportive mother, Eugenie Besserer, is heartbroken by this. Years later, and all grown up, Jackie now calls himself Jack Robin and has become a talented jazz singer performing in blackface. He attempts to build a career as an entertainer, and just as his star is about to shine on New York's Broadway, his professional ambitions ultimately come into conflict with the demands of his home and heritage. Now, as our regular listeners would know, I love the silent film era. Today, filmmakers are blessed to have so many influences to guide them through their filmmaking journey. Filmmakers in the silent film era never had that luxury. They invented cinema. So I have so much respect for the silent film era. You can't argue the influence the jazz singer had on cinema. However, I didn't love this film as much as I expected. And that really annoyed me because I am continually moved by silent films such as Chaplin's The Kid or Lang's Metropolis or Griffith's Intolerance. I didn't like the music, and I didn't even find Jolson particularly appealing either. The only time the story moved me was a spiritual moment at the end between him and his father, and that was it. Now, as for the use of blackface, it really grates as an audience member today. As we know, this was common at the time, so I viewed it as more of a sign of the times and tried not to find offence in it too much. However, it has been interesting reading some people's thoughts on its use in this film. Now, at the time, Jewish immigrants were systematically locked out of many American industries, as were black people, women, and many others. So for Jewish entertainers like Jolson, wearing a blackface was actually a way of becoming white, which is really intriguing. This was a popular film, however, which spawned 3 other screen versions of The Jazz Singer, with the 1952 remake starring Danny Thomas and Peggy Lee, a 1959 television remake starring Jerry Lewis, and a 1980 remake starring Neil Diamond. I haven't seen any of those. Now, Greg, what are your thoughts on The Jazz Singer?
Well, I did a lot of research on this, by which I mean I watched the 1927 version for the first time.
Yep, for the first time.
I rewatched the 1980 Neil Diamond version, which I saw when it first came out. I knew about the 1952 Danny Thomas one, never heard of the Jerry Lewis one. That's interesting. Well, I'm going to correct you on one little point, I think, which is a couple of times you talked about how it's the first time it had synchronised dialogue in the film.
Yes.
I don't think it's dialogue, because really it's Al Jolson speaking or singing. And in one case, his beloved mother is sitting there going, That's right. Yeah, it's not really dialogue. It's a monologue.
No, it is. But it's the first, like in terms of dialogue, it's singing.
It's interesting. I'll come back to the issue of using blackface a bit later on if you don't mind, but talk about watching the film. So I'd never seen it before. I was a wee bit excited about it.
Yeah, so was I.
And I'm not sure if we watched the same version or not, because I imagine there's been some editing over the years and how sound's used. So when it started, it had a 4.5-minute overture. Did you have that?
Yeah, same.
And my wife and I were sitting watching it going, where's the film?
Yep, that was what I was thinking.
I think in the end we fast-forwarded that a bit.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry, Mr. Jolson and co.
I couldn't do it.
And then the film started, and it was quite obviously someone had put sound over a silent film. You know, the music and... Actually, music and singing, I think, were obviously overlaid onto the soundtrack. And after a while, my wife looked at me and said, I thought you said this was a talkie.
Yeah.
And I kind of worked out in my head what must be going on, that we were leading up to it, but I had never had that understanding.
No, me neither.
I thought this was a talking film.
So did I.
And at first, once we got past the wretched overture...
Yes.
and of course, there was another 3 or 4 minutes at the end, which was the exit music.
I couldn't do it.
But I wasn't sure when the real talky bit happened, and I think it would have been a very different experience to be in the theatre watching it, where it was really clear, I would imagine, someone was playing a piano, maybe someone was at the front singing, and then all of a sudden the screen is doing the singing and the talking.
Absolutely.
That must be mind-blowing.
That would have been mind-blowing.
And I'm really sorry that I never... Thinking about, this film being 1927. So my grandparents were either side of 18 when this came out in Australia, so it might have been a little bit later, but I would have loved to have now gone back and said to them, what was that like?
Yeah.
So the lead actress in this film, Mae McAvoy, who plays...
Oh, and I didn't even mention her.
Mary Dale, the love interest.
Yeah, that's right.
She apparently, when the film started, would keep sneaking into the backs of cinemas to watch the film and wait for that magic moment when, just... bedlam erupted when people realised what was actually happening, that this was really on the screen rather than surround sound.
That's right.
We don't get that experience.
We don't, but it was such a surprise to me when it first started to see that it was silent, and I was like, when does it? And then it got me, and I went,
no. Then I was going, so is it happening now? I couldn't quite tell.
Yeah.
And
when you've got that expectation, it's very different to what they would have experienced.
So I was a bit disappointed because. It's not a well-known fact that this is not a complete talkie picture.
No, it's not.
It's talkie in 3 or 4 parts.
Yeah.
And we can't have that same experience. So in a lot of ways, it's hard to judge. I mean, without a doubt, as you say, the fact that this is a major movie milestone.
Yes.
Heading towards its first centenary now.
Yes.
So in about 5 years' time, it's going to be its centenary. Interested to know if anything's being planned to celebrate, because it's a moment. It's an historical moment.
It is a moment. It is, and that's why I don't like saying that I didn't like it, but that much. But I can understand the significance of it. It's
yes.
it's so huge what it did, but I can enjoy many silent films and still enjoy the experience, and I didn't
And what
really
do you
love it
think
there.
when he stopped singing and started doing bird whistles?
Oh yeah,
That first bit.
look, you know what? I'd seen that bit in a film. I forget which film I've
I
seen
can
it
tell you
in.
because I watched that too. I watched half of it.
right.
I watched the Al Jolson story from around about 1950.
Right.
That tells the story of his life. Now, I know, from the little bit I know about Al Jolson's life, I know the story must be completely made up because his mother died when he was 7 or 8 years old, and she's a
Yeah.
major character in his
Yeah,
backstory.
that's right.
He got into the showbiz of his brother. There is no brother in the film. He ends up doing blackface, minstrel kind of stuff in this filmed story. He ends up doing that because somebody else gets drunk and he takes it on and he gets discovered that night. Who knows what the reality is? But he was doing the bird whistles. That was a big part of his act.
Yeah.
Now, I'm like, really?
Yeah. Well, I'd seen that bit in the.
He was
I
a
forget
big
another film.
star.
Yeah. He was a huge
Even
star
before the film.
Absolutely, and this is the thing. I hadn't seen much of Al Jolson at all, and so I was looking forward to this. I really was. I just didn't have fun. I didn't like the music. I love 1920s music. I'm a big fan of a lot of 1920s, but nothing in this really makes me.
Mama?
Oh no, God no! Oh mama, no, I can't do it.
No, well, maybe that's because that I'll walk a million miles for one of your smiles. That is part of the myth now of that moment.
It is, yeah, that's
So,
right. Yeah,
no, I quite like that. But no songs that now, and I know a lot of songs from that period,
Yeah.
20s, 30s, 40s, and so on. Not a lot I really recognised.
yeah,
It's a bit like the Neil Diamond film in that it was a concert film.
yeah.
Like there's big sequences in the 1980 version where it's basically a Neil Diamond concert on
Yeah,
film.
right.
And I think
Yeah.
it's the same in a lot of the bits he does with the actual sound. It's an Al Jolson concert.
Yeah.
And the weird part for me was that...
He's got a beautiful voice. It's not.
Oh, he has. Yeah. But the weird part for me was he has this big reunion with his mother around the piano, and that's all, talky, if you like. And then the big emotional moment comes when his father, who has, denied him,
That's right.
comes back in the room, and suddenly we're back in silent territory.
Yes.
I would have thought that would have been a natural for the big conversation with his
Yeah,
dad, and
true.
it wasn't. But I do agree with you. The strong moments in this are the spiritual moments, and I'd say there are 3.
Yeah.
And all of them are silent from memory.
Mm-hmm.
In order, I think. The first one is when he goes to a cantor concert to relive what he's now lost from his childhood, his dad being the cantor.
That's right.
The second one is when he looks into a mirror in a dressing room somewhere and sees through the mirror
Yes.
into, his father performing.
Performing. Yeah.
That's the right
Yeah.
verb, as the cantor in the synagogue. And then the third one is when the spirit of his father appears behind him when Al Jolson's character is being the cantor.
That's right.
And puts his hand on his shoulder. Those were all very moving moments.
That is a moving moment to me. But
And the technology of those as well, like I imagine, and you know more about this than me, I think, because of your love of D.W. Griffiths, but I would imagine the superimposing of the father's image on that would have been a known technique. But the looking through the mirror,
but
I
not
was kind of
used too
wondering
much.
about.
Yeah, not too much though. It was very well done.
Yeah, it was.
It was very
It
well
was
done.
moving.
It was, and I just expected to like it a lot more than I did. I was excited. So maybe I overhyped it in my mind or whatnot because it's up there as like I'm surprised that I'd never seen it, but
Yeah.
it was just never.
It was one of those things I never got around to.
Yeah, I'm surprised I never saw. I mean, I read about it, on the history of cinema books and all the rest of it, and the first talkie and all of that, mama, and all that. I heard the music. But I just, I hadn't seen it all in full yet, so I didn't really know what it was about.
I mean, it's quite a sentimental, schmaltzy kind of story, really.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is.
What I also found interesting was that when the Jackie character and his mother are reunited around the piano before the father comes home, and you get the sound of their conversation, fairly one-sided conversation, but they seem to be real people, in the filmic sense, having that conversation. And then the father comes home and it goes back into silent. And I felt like they were being historically distanced from me.
Yeah, right.
Like I was watching a silent film and then suddenly I'm watching a film and it seems that little bit more real and then it kind of slips back. So the fact that it was moving between these modes,
Oh, it was jarring.
it was jarring, disorienting.
Yeah.
But again, we're not seeing the experience
We're not.
because that's historically distanced from us, which it wouldn't have been to a 1927
All
audience.
they knew was the silent, and that was
And then suddenly
it.
there's this amazing new thing. So we can't watch it in that context anymore. Going back to the question of blackface.
Yeah.
So I'd forgotten. I mean, I've seen all the famous stills and so on of him singing. I'd forgotten that he was in blackface. So when he started putting it on, I got a real shock.
Yeah, it is.
And then he puts on that funny kind of almost like a little carpet wig.
Yeah, that's right.
Which was more shocking still because I'd never really thought about that before.
Yeah, no.
And I felt really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Now,
today, it's really great.
That was
It does great on you.
shtick. And, it's part of probably a continuing thing where the dominant culture, particularly in America, the white culture, discovers or picks up on things within black musical culture in particular and brings it into the broader spectrum. So you talk about Elvis, you talk about blues, you
Yes.
talk about rap and hip-hop, probably, not my area.
Yeah.
And the minstrel motif was another way where they were doing that. But
Yeah.
I find what you say about losing the Jewishness through blackface to become white is really interesting. I probably have to think about that.
Yeah, yeah. It was an interesting. I thought somebody said it, and I just thought it was an interesting point of view from just the shock of it, and that I was sort of not aware of how the Jewish people were being treated at the same time. So I wasn't too sure about that in that time. So to read that, I just got it was a surprising sort of little twist on that. So that's why I thought I'd bring it.
So what do they do in the Jerry Lewis and Danny Thomas ones?
I don't know.
Do they do blackface?
I don't know.
There's a reference to it in the Neil Diamond one, 1980.
Oh, there is a reference.
And, it's obviously very deliberate. So what happens is that at the very start of the film, they take the mother character right out. She's non-existent. She's died many years previously.
Oh, wow.
He's married.
She's an emotional part of the film,
Yeah.
though.
Oh, yeah.
That story, now, the mother's
It's about the
support...
different responses from the parents.
Absolutely, yes. And to me, that's a huge... You can't just get rid of the mother character there. She's ultimately what brings him back.
Well, they did.
No, really? Well, she brings him back.
They replace her with his wife.
Oh, okay.
Rivka. And so,
that's weird.
Whereas in the original, and I don't think I've seen the middle two, but in the original one, whereas the father is upset and disowns the son because he won't be a cantor anymore, in the remake, it's Sir Laurence Olivier, who you might argue is overacting a bit, like he sort of rips the collar of his suit, says, I have no son. It's very Laurence Olivier. Anyway, and blessings and peace be upon you, Sir Lawrence. But he gets upset because his son's marriage is broken down. They both realise they want different things. And then he discovers that he's actually living with another woman, played by Lucy Arnaz, Lucille Ball's daughter.
Right.
And so the disgrace of his son living with another woman when his marriage is over but not quite over kind of thing is a great source of shame to him. So they really play with the dynamics of the story. But anyway, at the start of the film, what happens is that Neil Diamond has written some songs for a group of black singers, one of whom is his best friend. And so they get their big break, but one of their band members is sick. So Neil Diamond puts on the blackface. I don't think he puts a wig on. He's got this big bushy hair thing.
Yeah, he does
but
that.
He puts the blackface on, and then he goes on to compliment the band to have the right number of singers. And he's the lead singer. And then there's a talent scout in the audience. And then right at the end, he's looking at Neil Diamond, looking at the others, and he realises what's going on. And he stands up and he uses the immortal words, "That ain't no brother, that's a white boy." And then the fight breaks out in the bar. That's how they play it in. And even that feels quite a bit dated as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But speaking of buddies, just want to point out one little connection between two films we're talking about. So just before the first talking sequence, the Al Jolson character is in a club having a meal with his buddy.
Yes.
Do you know who plays the buddy?
Who is that?
It's a very young William Demarest, who is, if he's remembered these days, is probably best known for either Preston Sturges kind of comedies in the 40s or so, or as the second actor to play the uncle character in My Three Sons, the TV series.
I'd never seen it.
No, anyway. But he plays the mentor of Al Jolson in the Al Jolson story, and in fact just missed out on a Best Supporting Actor for that role.
Oh, wow,
So there's a nice connection between those two films as well.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's come to scores. What are you going to give it, Greg?
I'm going to give this a 6.
Okay.
And I'm trying rating all these films this time around, I'm trying to put aside their importance because of what they do with technology and look at as a film. So as a film, yeah, it's a 6. I think it is a historical curiosity. It's not a bad little story. There are some good moments, as we said, but I don't think there's enough to engage us still in it, and we can't replicate that first experience. So it's worth watching to see this moment and to see how it moves between silent and talkie. But yeah, I think it's a bit past.
Look, I feel like I'm being harsh on this, considering the significance of it. But like, I have to look at it from today's perspective of watching a movie. Just like I said before, I can watch a good silent movie and get very moved by it. You know, watch Kaplan's The Kid, I'm in tears. Like, it's really, and it moves me.
And
so
how I'm about Buster Keaton.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's not about the age of the film. It's just about how it's, it stands the test of time, really. And so I don't think it does hold up. Watch it for the significance. Watch it for film history. And if film history lovers, you have to see it. But I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. I can't give it more than that.
Yeah, I can see that's where you're heading. And
yeah.
Look, maybe I'm a little generous.
Yeah.
And you said, in your introduction to the film, you talked about how basically back in the silent age, they were inventing a language.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were inventing film, a language. And so you look at what Chaplin did, you look at all the things I love about Buster Keaton.
Oh, Griffith.
You look at Harold Lloyd.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen any Griffith. We'll have to fix that one day. But there is some inventiveness here going on, apart from the use of sound.
Yes.
In terms of those moving moments, but yeah, there's not enough there.
Just for story-wise.
And again, in some ways maybe the story's dated a bit because it is a kind of a schmaltzy, sentimental tale, and we've seen it before, but maybe there hadn't so much then, don't know.
So the second film we are going to discuss is the 1973 film Westworld.
Which, by about 20 years, prefigures writer-director Michael Crichton's later novel, Jurassic Park, which becomes the famous film. Both of them tell a tale of a theme park that gets out of hand, fatally. It also plays on then developing anxieties about computers that turn on people, coming on the back of HAL in 1968's 2001, A Space Odyssey, and the Colossus and Guardian supercomputers in the 1970 movie Colossus, The Forbidden Project, that scared me mightily as a child. Have you seen that?
No.
Anyway, in Westworld, Peter, Richard Benjamin, arrives for his first visit to the Delos Resort, obviously based on Disneyland, for a much-needed break after his divorce. The resort's themed worlds, populated by android robots, are clear evolutions of boyhood games: cowboys, knights of old, and Roman soldiers. Except in this Oedipal world for grown-up boys, you can really kill the men and then have sex with the always willing women. You might argue that Westworld adds new meaning to the phrase, computers that turn on people. At first, Peter has a boyish sense of excited wonder about the place. But after his first kill and his first techno-sex, this quickly changes to an unthinking enjoyment of the pleasures of this world without a moral code. In this way, he comes to match his friend and fellow tourist, John, James Brolin, who is making a return visit to Delos. This film clearly has 3 acts. 1, entry into this world by Peter and us. 2, revelation of the problems at its heart, including its corporate morality or lack thereof. And 3, a relentless hunt of Peter by a gunslinger robot, Yul Brynner, through the different fantasy worlds. The first act has a light comic touch that leads into the second, but this is gradually replaced by a sense of grim foreboding as we move into the third. A financially strapped Yul Brynner took this job for the money towards the end of his career, and he even reused his costume from the Magnificent Seven. But he is excellent as the gunslinger, robotic and with a peculiar glint in his eyes due to mirrored contact lenses, and yet he later conveys the lostness of a robot who can no longer rely on his visual technology. His terrific portrayal inspired Arnold Schwarzenegger 10 years later in The Terminator. This was Crichton's first feature film as a director. As a writer, he effectively uses technology to complement the storytelling rather than the other way around. In the tension-filled third act, early 2D CGI is used to show you that the gunslinger sees only shapes and patterns, that there's no humanity here. This is combined with an unusual fluttering sound that raises the pulse at key moments, And that's before the robot starts running after Peter. Crichton knew that he somehow wanted to show the robot's vision. His script described it as a bizarre, computerised image of the world with flashed-up, calculated figures and shifting green tones to represent shifts in the gunslinger's concentration. But in a pre-Iron Man world, he didn't know how to achieve this, particularly on a low-budget film. Crichton eventually found John Whitney Jr., the son of an experimental filmmaker who was in the early stages of his own career. Whitney devised a technique to scan and then pixelate images into coloured blocks. These low-res images were made to work through the use of colour. Indoors, an actor was filmed against a dark background with solid white clothes, hair and makeup. And horseback shots similarly used a completely red actor to stand out against the sky. Crichton and his team were pioneers in the area. Even afterwards, few 1970s feature films used computer graphics, until Star Wars in 1977 and Alien 2 years later. A notable exception was this film's 1976 lesser sequel, Future World, which included a 3D computer animated hand created by a young graduate student, Ed Catmull, who would go on to co-found Pixar Animation Studios. Beyond the innovative technology, Westworld stands up in a way that our other two films don't. There are deeper levels to this story that reward rewatching. As well as a morality tale of corporate greed, it unleashes the male psyche with consequences. Although we know there are female guests, the film only explores the male experiences, through Peter, John, and two other unnamed characters. Curiously, we never see the fate of the third Western guest, Dick Van Patten. It's interesting that the robot's flaw is that they develop self-agency. For example, an android woman unexpectedly refuses the sexual advances of a guest. It's also noteworthy that the first harm done to the guests is by a snake, which, to quote the Horticulturist blog, is a warning that something is wrong in paradise. A final note. Delos is named after the Greek birthplace of Apollo, god of poetic inspiration, and Artemis, goddess of the hunt. It feels like there's a thesis or two hiding in there somewhere. But above all, Westworld is a thriller that holds its own a half-century later. So, Ricardo, just wondering, which world would you go to?
I think the Roman would be great, but I think I really couldn't. I'd have to go to the Westworld. I have to go to Westworld. I love the West. I love the Wild West.
Yeah.
But Roman, I was thinking, I'd go between Roman and Westworld.
And Roman, what, for the orgies or the short skirts?
Oh, both. Oh, it was Roman times. Look, I really loved Westworld. I thought it was a great film. I'd never seen it before, so
I'd seen it a couple of times, I think.
And you're talking about the references between, the Terminator and Jurassic Park. During it, I just went, wow, Terminator is so inspired by this and by Yul Bremner's.
Well, it's only 10 years difference, 11 years.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. That's true. But what a film. I mean, I thought visually, as it started, I thought, this is visually a really nice film. When I was getting the reflections in the glasses of the airport and everything like that, you were getting all these different lovely images that were being shown to you.
Opening scenes when they were coming in on the hovercraft.
Yes.
That reminded me a bit of 2001, when they're on that space flight, those stewardesses.
Yes.
And I was also wondering, so is the cabin crew, are they robots? Maybe not the pilot, but are the stewardesses, are they robots? Because they don't actually say or do much.
They don't. I think they were.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But Yul Bremner's performance, he is a robot. Like, he really is. Yes. You believe that character. And even the whole, when the face comes off, the actual makeup and what they did technically, it still stands up.
Well, the face
with
itself,
the whole robot itself.
I mean, I've watched, I don't know how many sci-fis and coroner films and so on. Yeah. And you see some very ordinary special effects.
Absolutely.
But the mask when it came off, looked really good.
Very good. And the thing is, I mean, it happens in the Terminator and you see Schwarzenegger's face, and they've obviously done it as a model, but you can tell that it's a model. Yeah. Whereas this, you really couldn't.
It looked like his face had come off. It looked
like his face had come off. But even the interior of it and was fantastic. It was really great. Michael Crichton, I mean, yes, it is Jurassic Park all over again. I mean, they've just obviously kept the same, story, really, and just transferred it to dinosaurs. But, wow, I really loved it. And so did my son, who watched it with me. And
was he scared in the last part? The hunt?
Not scared, no, but he was thrilled, but not scared.
Yeah, I could feel my pulse going again, even though I know the story. Like I say, it's probably the third time I've seen it, and the second time would have been about maybe 3 years ago. I still felt it, and that weird noise that they use, that fluttering kind of noise.
Yes, that's right. Yes, well, he mentioned that. My son, he said he was like, "Oh, there's that sound. What's that sound they're using?" And I said, "It's just building the tension, and it just really does build the tension well."
It almost feels a bit like the robot's pulse or something.
Yeah,
like it sounds like a mechanical noise, and yet it feels like a pulse or something.
I thought the vision of the robot was fantastic. It was I loved what they did, the special effect. Yeah. I thought it was handled beautifully.
And it dates well against subsequent special effects.
Yeah, I agree.
Films from the, let's say, other side of the 80s date very much.
They do.
The only thing that really dates in this is the supercomputers.
Yes.
In Nerd Central.
Absolutely.
That look very sort of late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, I agree. The whole backstory, obviously, to you're saying corporate greed and whatnot with the scientists and whatnot. I don't think they went far with that. It was really just.
My understanding is they take that a lot further in the TV series.
Yeah, that's right.
And also, whereas the film is about how the robots develop agency.
Yes.
What they do, I've watched probably about half of the first season of the TV series. What they do is that the robots, the androids, whatever they are, develop rights and a history, and it's not just in the moment, no, I don't want to have sex with you, or I actually am going to kill you. They are alternative people, which I think again reflects the times in the same way the original one does as well.
Yeah,
the concerns.
Well, apparently they push it a lot further in the series in all aspects. Which I thought when I was watching the film, wow, I think they're going to be pushing this a lot further. The violence, the sex, I think they're going to be pushing it a lot further in the series because they can now. And, but gee, it's a great journey. I was really surprised. What I thought about when I was going to watch it, when I was watching it, I thought, I know I'm going to probably like this, but I'm going to find it dated.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. And I didn't really. I thought it was beautifully made, and like I said, visually, it's really lovely.
Well, a sequel which I've seen bits of quite a while ago, the sequel Future World, Crichton had nothing to do with it. So the original film Westworld was done on a fairly tight budget. I think it was about $1.25 million, which wasn't a lot.
Yeah,
but it was one of MGM's biggest hits that year, if not the biggest. So of course they were going to make a sequel, but Crichton I think had moved on, and. From what I remember, the Future World story is about the corporation using robots to replace world leaders and journalists.
Right.
Peter Fonda, Blythe Danner, and others. So it's not as interesting a story, and from what I remember, I think that's probably dated a lot more because Crichton, in the end, first and foremost, is a storyteller.
Well, I was going to see Westworld. At one point, it was probably about 8 years ago, there was a double bill at the Astor Cinema
which is the old Art Deco cinema here in Melbourne.
That's right. There was it was Westworld and Soylent Green.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Which I've not seen. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it either. And I thought that was a really good double. Then something happened and I couldn't go. And I was like, I think because I'd been to the Astor another time and I saw the trailer for it. And I thought, that would be awesome because the Astor Cinema shows a lot of old films.
Yeah.
And they're the best thing. It's the best way to see it. And you
big screen
audience. Yeah, and everybody appreciates cinema in that when they go to the Astor.
Can't hit pause.
No, you can't. In fact, when it's 2001: A Space Odyssey, you see it in 70mm. It's a great cinema. And it would have been great in there. But I think if you're watching it on a big screen, you would actually get more of the thrills actually than just on your TV.
Yeah.
But
I found creepiest the scenes when they were cleaning up overnight. So all the guests have gone to bed.
Yeah,
and then the cleanup
that machine
come out. It's
comes
quite a silent kind of sequence where they pick up, the dead robots from the street.
Yes. And then redo
and the
them.
dead horses robots. That was almost comic, actually.
That was quite odd because one thing I sort of picked up on at the end, I just thought, hang on, So all the robots are going crazy, but why aren't the horses going crazy?
Well, okay, here's one thing I read.
Yeah.
What happens is that when they get the virus, and I think this is one of the first times that a computer virus concept was mentioned, certainly in popular culture. But once they get the virus, what they do is they return to who they really are. So the killers become killers without modification or weaknesses like, the blind spot in the left eye.
That's right.
The rattlesnake becomes a snake that can bite. The woman becomes a woman with agency who refuses sex from the guest. What does a horse do? A horse just a horse.
Right. You're right. A horse is a horse, of course.
It's not Mr. Ed, but that's not talking or anything weird like that. So that what the virus is doing is just removing the constraints on who they're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's really interesting. No, good pickup. That's good. I like that.
But I did find those sequences a bit creepy. And I wondered why on the final night, so the two main characters, Peter and John, are in the bar fight.
Yeah, I love that scene.
Yeah, but when they wake up next, and a lot of that's done for humour.
Yes, of course.
By the way, did you know, apparently that set was also where they filmed Blazing Saddles in that western town.
Oh, I haven't seen Blazing Saddles for a very long time. Really, the same movie lot.
That
wow.
would be a good double. So they play that bar fight scene for laughs.
Yeah.
And then they wake up next morning and they total the whole place.
They do.
And then when they woke up next morning, everything's still there, which probably is the first trigger that something's different, but they haven't processed that.
Yeah.
But I also found myself thinking, but would they have replaced all the tables and all that broken glass overnight? That just seemed a bit...
Yeah, well,
maybe
that's
I'm being a
right.
bit too literal.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But I wanted to point out two things from the film. One is, the other special effect, if you like, that happens is when Richard Benjamin's character throws acid into the face of the gunslinger.
Oh, and
Do you know how that was done?
How?
I found out how that was done. What they did was they put an oil-based makeup on the face of Yul Brynner that was mixed with Alka-Seltzer. So Richard Benjamin throws water onto his face, which reacts with the Alka-Seltzer and starts bubbling.
No way. Oh, how good is that?
Again, it's really clever.
That's
and
clever.
It's about the story rather than something high-tech.
How good is that? That's
if you
great.
remake it now, I don't know what happens with the TV show, but if they remade that scene now, it'd be all, computer animated face stuff.
It would be.
It was good old-fashioned... stagecraft.
Stagecraft.
And the other thing I wanted to point out is some of the actors in this. So quite a few of the actors I recognised from things around that time. They were comic actors. The guy who plays the head scientist, Alan Oppenheimer, I look at him and I think, get smart.
Right.
Same with the technician who gets shot out in the desert with the broken down vehicle.
Yes, right.
I know his face from various things from the 60s as well, as a child of the 60s. But the other interesting thing about Alan Oppenheimer, who plays the chief scientist, the following year, he got a new role in a TV series. He played the creator of the $6 Million Man.
Oh, no way.
Dr. Rudy Wells, which is quite nice.
Oh, that's great.
The other interesting thing in here is Miss Carey, who's the madam in the brothel. Did you recognise her?
No.
That's Majel Barrett. I don't know if that name means anything to you. It will to some of our listeners. She was in the original TV series of Star Trek. She played the nurse, Christine, I think her character was, and eventually married Gene Roddenberry. So she's Mrs. Star Trek in this sci-fi film as well.
No idea.
Played the computer voices in the 80s
Not a
remakes
Trekkie.
and so on.
Yeah.
I am quite a bit. Doctor Who, number one, but Trekkie's up there. And then the other person I wanted to point out, only because I stumbled across this, in medieval world, there's the Queen, who one of the guests is having an affair with, because class doesn't matter here. As long as you've got the $1,000 US a day, which I calculated now would be about $6,500 a day. As long as you've got that kind of money, you can have anything you want. You can be given the sheriff's badge, whatever the guest wants for, they get. So the Queen, who's quite a very English character, but is majestic, literally. Is having the affair with the guest. She's played by an actress from Sydney called Victoria Shaw. So there's actually a little Australian connection to this film as well.
Okay.
Before we kind of took over Hollywood.
Well, did you notice? It was a very subtle thing. Again, it's clever. When the robots get shot, the blood is a brighter red.
It looks like paint.
Yeah, it does. But when someone gets shot for real,
well, when the first
it's
one
a darker red.
Well, when it first happened and you saw it, to me it looked like the paint. But when that character's lying on the ground bleeding out, the blood that's coming out in the ground looked real.
Is real. Yeah. That's right, because it was real. And I thought even the subtlety of the blood being bright and the other one being darker, just that thought, because at that time, a lot of those, you watch a lot of movies and at that time, and it looks like bright red, and it doesn't look real at all. So it's really interesting to see even they thought about that, and I loved that.
We've talked about Yul Brynner. We haven't talked about the other main actors. We haven't talked about James Brolin or Richard Benjamin, who are both very good.
James Brolin is great, and I think he's very charismatic.
This is his first key part.
Yeah.
So he done things, but then his career took off from here. So he played Clark Gable in Gable and Lombard in 1976. He played the lead astronaut in Capricorn 1, which I remember seeing when it came out in 1977. He does the character well. He's relaxed. He's a little bit, not jaded, but, been there, done that kind of character.
Yeah, no, I thought he did it very well.
But you also get a sense that he's looking after his mate after the divorce. But, in fact, none of the characters, you really know much about them.
No.
Like, you don't know the name of any of the other guests except for John and Peter. You know that Peter is a lawyer. I don't know if you know what John does for a living. You know that Dick Van Patten's character is a banker.
Yeah.
I think it's him. But almost no characters. The scientists, no one has a name. They're all kind of figures in the story.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of backstory. But I think Brolin and Benjamin carried off well. Now, Benjamin's not my favourite actor.
No, he's not for me either.
He was a real face of the 70s.
Yeah, right.
But I think he does a good job, particularly in the early parts. When he's that kind of excited little boy, I think he really does that well.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, I just found the character... It's not about his performance. I just found the character quite boring.
Well, the second half
he's
of the
meant
film,
to be. Second half, he picks up a bit. He is on the run, yeah.
And he's not that inventive on being on the run, but I think that's part of the story, that it's only when he decides to actually be a man and stand his ground that he starts having success.
That's right.
And using his brain in the banqueting hall.
Yeah, yes.
But he's not my favourite actor, but I do want to say, the same year, 1973, he made a film, not a very well-known film these days, that I love, that I'm going to get you to watch one day, called The Last of Sheila.
Okay.
Which was co-written by Anthony Perkins and Stephen Sondheim.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God, what a pairing.
We have to do it one day about unexpected pairings.
Yeah, it's true.
And it was full of Hollywood stars at the time. So it was James Mason, Raquel Welch, James Coburn, Richard Benjamin, obviously, Diane Cannon, and others. So it's a cute little murder mystery kind of film I really like. So I'm a bit endeared to Benjamin just because of that one film. But I suspect he's a better director than actor. So he's made films like Private Benjamin, for example.
Oh, he made that, did he? He directed that, did he? Right.
His latter career, he was always an actor-director, but his latter career moved very much into directing films. He made Mermaids, the one with Cher and Bob Hoskins.
Wow. Okay.
He made Little Nikita with River Phoenix. He made My Stepmother is an Alien.
Oh, wow. Okay. So he's made a few. Okay, there we go.
The Money Pit, City Heat, and my favourite year, the Peter O'Toole film as well, about the actor who's...
I haven't seen that, no.
So, I think he's quite a good director.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because the other film he made back in the day was Catch-22.
Oh, I've heard of them all.
Yeah, so he was... he's still around, and he's had a really great career, but I preferred him in the first half of the film, you're right, than the second. I think that whole little boy transitioning, he did really well.
I think he did very well with that.
There's not a lot to do in the second half.
Yeah, that's it. So what are you going to give this, Greg?
I really wondered about this. I teetered a bit. I was originally going to give it a 7, but actually I'm going to boot it up to an 8.
Snap, I'm doing exactly the same.
I was thought about it.
Yeah, me too. In fact, I thought about it last night, and I was thinking, what am I going to get? I was thinking 7, then I went, no, it's got to be an 8. I've got to give it a, because it's really good now.
It prefigures a whole lot of things.
And it does, yeah.
And unlike, and I'm going to call it on the next film as well, unlike the other two films we're talking about, as I said earlier, I really think that the technology serves the story. In the others, I think it's more the other way. It's more the other way around, particularly with the third film we're going to move on to.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, no, for me it's an 8.
Definitely. 8 from me too.
Okay, so now for the third of our firsts, Ricardo, why don't you tell us about the 2001 film?
Based on the video game franchise of the same name.
You've lost me already. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Based on the video game franchise of the same name, this 2001 film, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, was the first animated feature to seriously attempt to portray photorealistic CGI, computer-generated image, humans using motion capture technology. Motion capture technology allows animators to record the movements of human actors and reproduce those movements on computer-generated characters. Specialists in this field place sensors all over an actor, and these track and record the actor's movements, allowing them to be mapped on a computer screen in real time as a virtual skeleton. Animators then use computer programs to overlay information on top of the movements, creating a virtual set of movement to take place in. Director Hironobu Sakaguchi wanted this to look and feel like a live-action movie, not a cartoon for kids. He really wanted to push the envelope in CGI technology to show that CGI films can be taken seriously, dramatically. He wanted it to have real emotional characters that were physically real and looked as real as possible. But let's get to the story. In the post-apocalyptic year of 2065, Earth has been ravaged by alien phantom-like creatures which kill you through contact. They roam the Earth, destroying everything in their path, threatening to extinguish life itself. Dr. Aki Ross Ming-Na Wen, an intelligent young scientist, hurries to locate the aliens' secrets, not only to save the planet, but also herself, as her body is infected by alien particles. She teams up with a military squadron led by her friend Captain Gray Edwards, Alec Baldwin, and Dr. Sid, Donald Sutherland, but also with some other military personnel as well. Now, opposing her aren't only the alien creatures, but also a man, General Hein, James Woods, who believes mankind can save themselves through brute force, which Akai feels will harm the Earth beyond repair. Akai and Gray work toward a peaceful end, but the scheming General Hein devises a plot to eradicate the aliens in one swift, destructive blow, even if it destroys the Earth right along with them. Now, I remember when this film came out in 2001, and I really marveled at it back then. It looked so real, and I remember thinking, wow, actors on screen can be a thing of the past in the future. Well, not so. But now, over 20 years later, this looks like a good story-based PlayStation game. The visuals are still good to look at even now, but it's the story that just doesn't fire at all. I was very bored by it. I couldn't feel connected to the characters at all, and that's a real problem because this film was based on a popular video game. It is meant to inspire those who haven't played it to then play it. But it just didn't do it for me. And it's such a shame because the money and work that went into this was insane. Its budget was $137 million. However, it really bombed at the box office and received mixed reviews. Now, since this movie came out, other movies using full motion capture technology have been made, from Polar Express, Jim Carrey's A Christmas Carol, The Adventures of Tintin, and Beowulf. And it's a shame that all of these films better the movie that started it all. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Where to start?
Yeah, I know.
Look,
I know.
I'm not this film's demographic.
Yeah, yeah.
And going into it, I didn't really expect to be. And I shifted a bit as the film went on. But let's pick up some of the things that you're talking about. I have not played the video game.
No, me neither.
I had no awareness of why it was called Final Fantasy. I mean, as you go, you understand why it's called The Spirits Within.
Yes, absolutely.
But I was sitting there thinking, the first part of the film, I had no idea what was going on. So Akai, whatever her name is, she lands on the post-apocalyptic world. She's hunting down a plant.
Yeah.
This team comes in to rescue her. Well, first to arrest her, you think, and then end up rescuing her. And it takes a long time for you to have any idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And I sat there thinking, is there some kind of backstory I'm supposed to be connecting this to, which is why I'm not getting this? And I wrote a note to myself, why is it called Final Fantasy? I don't understand. Where's the fantasy? What's final about it?
Well, where's the fantasy? Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
yeah.
Maybe the fantasy is that it would succeed as a film. Oh, look, I'm being cruel. In fact, so I watched this film half a week ago. It was only last night, I think, that I looked up Final Fantasy to say, because it was still bugging me, what's the connection here? What am I not understanding because I've not played with something before? Is this one in a series of films in a franchise? I just had no idea what was going on. So what I now understand, I think, is that the games are all quite different settings, different stories.
Yeah, they are. But
They just occasionally have some characters the same names. So there wasn't even any context that I could have been drawing on to understand the film as it started. So I had a real problem with it. I was toing and froing about the quality of the animation. Sometimes the animation was really blocky.
yes.
More the environments and machinery than the characters. But there was something off about the characters as well, particularly with Aki, but other characters too. The bodily proportions just looked wrong. She looked too thin. Her legs were too thin. There was something odd about her shoulders. It just wasn't working for me as animation. I'd rather... I was thinking, is it one of those fantasy things like, Wonder Woman where they're meant to be full-breasted and no waist kind of thing. But I just don't know that it was done terribly well, whether because it's the first time it was the motion body capture technology being used in this context, whether it hadn't quite got it right. And of course, now I think the benchmark from the little I've seen of it is the ABBA thing, the avatars, where they've really done this amazing multi-million-dollar exercise where they've captured the ABBA group and put them in performance, and from what I've seen, looks really, really real.
Yeah.
So
it's come a long
the
way.
animation wasn't really grabbing me.
In close-up, I found in close-up like on an eye or something.
In this film?
It looked amazing, and there was even a shoulder or something. You had little hairs on the shoulder. I mean, there's a lot of detail put into it. And one thing, I think they got caught up in the technology.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
And that's what I'll say about Westworld.
Yeah.
That what Crichton got right was the technology served the story.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this one, I think, has got it around the wrong way.
Completely the opposite.
Yeah. And I was making notes to myself about, so these are some kind of light baddies. Like, there need to be more story exposure.
So much.
Early on to help me make sense of the story.
Yeah, I agree.
And it did some odd things story-wise. Like, it killed off a lot of its major characters. That's a bold move.
Yes.
And I was a bit confused because I was thinking, this is a franchise. Aren't these characters meant to be in other stories? And then when I did the back read, I thought, okay, I get that a bit more about what's going on. So it really wasn't gelling with me until there were some scenes that really, I thought, okay, wow. And even more wow if I'd seen this on a big cinema screen rather than, my fair-sized TV. And that was where they went down to the Earth somewhere. I lost track.
Yeah.
And then you saw the full majesty of these red phantom dragons kind of coming over the horizon.
Yes.
That was done really, really well.
Yeah.
And I thought, if more of the film had been like this, and if they just really spent more time on story, this could have worked a lot better for me.
Oh, to me, it was all story based because I can handle whatever after over 20 years has done to make it not as real. I mean, I remember in 2001. It looked very real because I hadn't seen that before. Yeah. It's interesting watching the development of that over this time. But again, you've got to serve the story. I mean, technology is always going to go past, but like silent film, you can still get it and you can still feel it if it serves the story.
I didn't care about the characters.
I had no care about them.
And I think that's partly, it's
no
largely
emotion.
Story, but because the animation is more rudimentary than we might expect now, they didn't feel real to me to begin with.
No.
So you've got to get past that with the story and the
I
acting.
agree. Completely agree.
The other weird thing about this for me was that a few of the main characters actually looked like other actors to me. So you have the classic things, certainly in, let's say, 60s, 70s, 80s Disney animation and maybe beyond, but there was often a sense of who the actor was doing the voice in the representation of the character. So you'd have, Terry Thomas as Sir Hiss, the snake in the 70s Robin Hood. And he looked a bit like Terry Thomas. He had the gap tooth and so on. Here, it wasn't like that. No. I thought that the Alec Baldwin character actually looked like Ben Affleck.
Yes.
I thought that Donald Sutherland, who was the scientist, Sid, I thought he looked like an older Jeff Bridges, although back in 2001 maybe that wouldn't have been obvious to people. And I thought that Min-Na Wen, whose claim to fame, among other things, is she was the original voice of Mulan in the Disney film.
Oh, okay.
Her character seemed de-Asianized, which left me feeling a bit uncomfortable in the same way that the blackface did in the jazz.
Yeah, okay. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
You look at her photos, she's clearly an Asian American woman.
Yes.
But she looked Anglo. I would have liked to have seen more of the spirits of the actual actors infusing the representation of the characters as well.
Yeah, okay.
Don't just capture their bodies, capture their spirit.
Yeah, and
which is kind of ironic, because when you say people are killed when these red phantom creatures touch them, in fact, they had the spirit ripped out of their body.
That's right.
Which again, was quite a good effect. And there was a moment where one of the red dragons passes down the middle of the space shuttle, and everyone is to either side, but there's one guy who's kind of a baddie standing in the middle, and it goes down the cabin and then keeps going, taking the spirit with him. Yeah. There were moments that were really cinematic.
Yes, absolutely.
But there wasn't enough.
I like the shots. I like specific shots in it which stay with me, like the low angle shot underneath the ground when she's standing, and it looks like she's standing on water.
Yeah, the dream sequence.
The dream sequences, they're really lovely and really well executed. And again, on a nice screen and a big screen, it looked gorgeous. And even the final shot of this eagle going over mountains at the end of the film.
Bored there,
well, I just think the image was beautiful. And so there's gorgeous imagery throughout the whole thing.
Yes.
And if you want a visual feast, it's really good. But again, I just felt it was a bit of a loud mess. Didn't move me at all. I wasn't even feeling the action, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I know. And we've...
Because I didn't care about the characters. But
we've located this as the first photorealistic computer animated feature film.
That's right.
Using the body capture technology. And it was the most expensive video game inspired film until 2010, so 9 years later, when they released The Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time with Jake Gyllenhaal.
I didn't see that. Yeah.
I much preferred it.
Yeah, right.
It was film, it wasn't animation. But again, I just thought it had a stronger story. One more little footnote about this. So we said that the actress, Ming-Na Wen, who was playing Akai.
Yes, that's right. But then there was James Woods playing.
Yes. Did you know who was playing
General Hein?
The other female soldier?
No, because I think I picked up Steve Buscemi's voice quite easily, and I got Ving Rhames.
Yes,
is also in it as well. Who was the other?
I had to look up most of them. Well, the other one, the other female soldier in that central squad was Perry Gilpin, which means nothing to me. But when I looked her
nothing
up,
to me either as well, Greg.
She's actually she played for many years. She played Ros Doyle in Frasier.
Oh,
who was the kind of the sassy producer of Frasier's radio show.
I didn't watch Frasier.
What are you giving it?
3 out of 10. Sorry.
Why are you apologising?
No. I'm sorry to the filmmakers because I know they spend so long on it. But to me, it's I love the visuals. I'm giving it a 3 because I like the visuals in it, and that's fine. But to me, it bored me because I just couldn't. The story was just all over the place, and it was all.
It was attributed as the major cause of bankrupting the production company Square. And they had big plans for this to be the first in a series of films.
Well, if you're going to spend $137 million on technology, you've got to work on the story and make sure that is absolutely solid, and that that works. And it just doesn't. And part of me, I just go, well, is that to do with the animation of the faces? Maybe did they not get that right? Because the cheeks don't really move. Is it just the expressionlessness of the face? But no, it's not, because you get that in animation all the time. Yeah. In all types of animation. So it's not just about that.
Well,
it's
the major thing.
It's just the story
about all these 3 films is that technology will date. It's the story that will carry it.
Absolutely. It will.
In the moment and in future times as well. Well, I'm a bit kind of anew. I've given it a 4.
Yeah.
At the start, I don't know what I would have given it.
Yeah.
But then there were those moments where I thought, if there was more of that, this would actually be quite a good film, even though it's not my genre, but it just doesn't get there.
When I can get through a movie, I mean, I really just wanted to get through it, but I was literally so bored that it was a real struggle to get through a 1 hour and 40-minute film.
Yeah.
It was a struggle. And when it's a struggle like that, no matter what visuals are put in front of me, and the amount of that I know how much time they would have put into that and the money and whatnot. I get it from a back, but to me it's all about the story. And if I can't get through a 1 hour and 40-minute movie and I'm struggling with that so much, then it fails.
I think now it's a curiosity piece.
Yeah, I agree. And that concludes the first episode for season 5.
And, you know, I have to sit down at some point and work out how many films have we actually reviewed. I know it's more than 100.
Yeah.
But it must be, well, obviously it's climbing.
It is climbing.
We're excited about this episode.
Yes, we are.
But we're even more excited about our next episode. And the reason why is that my Auntie Mari is coming to play with us in podcast land. Now, she's my aunt. She's also my godmother. I've known her many years. Ricardo, you've known her for quite a while now, and you have that special bond with her
Absolutely.
as well. But the other thing we should mention about her is that she is a nun. She's a Catholic nun. Why is that important, Ricardo?
Because we're going to be reviewing nun films.
We are in our episode, which is called And Then There Were Nuns, or as I like to refer to it, Getting the Movie Habit.
So we're going to be looking at 1992's Sister Act, which is a nun favourite. And then we're going to be moving forward only 3 years to a more serious film, Dead Man Walking.
So we have a comic film and a serious drama, both focused around nuns in different aspects. And then the third film...
Yeah, which is really great. I'm really looking forward to that because I really want to get her perspective.
Yes,
on
exactly
the films and what they're like, whether, you know, she would just go, oh, that's just completely not right, or she might look at Sister Act and go, oh,
and
forget about it.
And we were really tempted to do The Sound of Music because that's the obvious choice, but we did that back in, I think, season 1.
Season 1.
And we wanted to, we're sticking to our principles in a very nunly way, maybe. And the third film, we're not going to tell you now what it is.
Yeah.
What we will say is that it's not actually a nun film, but it's a film that is loved by this particular nun and a bit of an unusual choice.
It is. It absolutely is.
You can guess, but you're probably wrong.
You're probably wrong. It was a surprise to me. It really was. But I'm really looking forward to that. I can't wait because it's great to have that perspective when you're watching these movies and just go, well, how really are we talking here?
And for more of the world to get to know Auntie Mari.
Yeah, no, it's going to be lovely. It's going to be fantastic.
So for now...
So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. We really appreciate it.
Season 5.
Season 5, we're on our way.